And then the next sculpture, I was ill again with COVID, and I had to literally be a face on a screen at the time when the lorry's there installing the sculpture. So someone stood there with a screen with my head on it, and I'm going left a bit, right a bit, and then the third sculpture
Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Innovative People's podcast, the podcast that is shedding more light on the community and innovators and creators within it. As usual, we are aiming to motivate and inspire you. If someone on here has already done it, you can do it too. I'm joined today by Rachel Carter, an artist who creates large-scale sculptures for the landscape along with her woven sculptural pieces. Welcome, Rachel Carter.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you grew up and any early inspirations you had into art?
Sure. So I live and have lived on the Derby-Notts border my entire life, and I'm fascinated by sculptural forms, textural forms, but my other hobbies are gardening and family ancestry. And I think it stemmed from being in junior school and being asked to do a family tree, and I remember very vividly drawing out this colourful chart and going to ask grandparents about who their parents was and drawing it all out. I had a lot of questions then, I still do now, and I think a lot of it is thinking about sort of more the female ancestors, being from a working class background and ancestors that have sort of zigzagged across the Midlands following different industries. There's very little left of them, very little records. Many of them want to be able to write or read. So finding out any bit of information, it makes me feel connected, but it's quite hard.
It's quite challenging.
Yeah, very challenging. So, and sometimes when all of those hobbies can come together in a project, then I'm really happy.
What would you say was your biggest inspiration? Because I read that you did applied arts degree. What university did you go to?
So I studied at the University of Derby, but I went as a mature student. So I've not ever known what I wanted to be as such, but always knew that I liked making things. You know, as young as I can remember, I was always encouraged to make, whether that was stripping down motorbikes with my dad, or fixing bits in the house, or whether it was working on a sewing machine with my mum. You know, I was always creating something, and I knew I wanted to create. That's all I knew. Unfortunately, the school I went to was not very progressive, and when I said that I wanted to do woodwork and metalwork at school, the teacher looked quite disgusted, really, and said, well, you can't do that, you're a girl, and if we allow you to do it, then it won't be fair on the boys, because we'd have to spend all our time with you instead of them.
I didn't think you'd be able to do it, didn't think you'd be good enough.
Yeah, but I was making things that was as good as what the boys are in my class, but I think whether it was that teacher or whether he just didn't want girls in his class, I was really dissuaded away from following that creative journey. And I was very shy as a child. I still, I feel I'm quite a shy person. So I don't think I stood up for myself, and I didn't really know what else to do. And I was always good at cooking. And my dad, I remember him saying at the time, well, people always need to eat, and you're always going to have a job with food. And I thought, well, that was good advice at the time. So off I went to catering school and learnt hotel management and all the ins and outs of the catering industry. And after 10 years following that line, I had this sort of, and you just suddenly get this clarity. And I just thought, this isn't what I want to do.
How old were you when the teacher was telling you that you can't?
Well, it was when you had to choose do your options. So that would have been pre-GCSEs.
13,
so about
14.
13, 14.
Yeah. So that must have been really difficult then to be able to then go on and do art, which is, working with your hands.
Yeah.
Woven art. It must have taken you a while to get over it. It must have affected you a little bit.
Yeah, it did. And I think when I had that sort of clarity moment, I was an adult, I had one daughter, and I just thought, I didn't really see my life going in this direction. And it was sometimes when you're suddenly, that fog lifts and you start looking, then things appear. So you notice them more, and if that makes sense. And I noticed this advertisement for local courses at the college. And at that time, Nottingham College had a lot of campuses across Nottinghamshire, where now it's all in the city. And they'd got a small college where I lived, and they was offering an AS level in fine art. And so I applied and went to talk to the tutor, and she said, well, did you do art at school? And I said, no. And she said, well, what do you do? So I took this box full of things that I'd made, and she said, well, you clearly are quite creative. Welcome to the course. And that was it. That started that journey. So from a part-time AS level, then they said, do you want to come back the next year and make it a full A level? So I said, yeah. It was really sort of feeding something. And then before I knew it, I was doing a foundation degree full-time whilst pregnant with my second daughter. And then they said, what university are you going to? And it was never something I thought I would do. No, there was no females in my family that had ever been to university. So it was sort of treading a very new path. But I just thought, I'm going to go for it. So I applied to Derby to do applied arts, and I was successful.
Financially, how did you cope with going to do A levels at college? Were you working during the time and then going to university as well, which is really expensive?
Yeah.
How were you able to?
Well, when I was doing my A levels, I was doing split shifts in the evening. So I was sleeping in shifts, and then when I'd take my daughter to school, then I would go to college and then finish college, make tea, and then it was just complete non-stop.
Yeah,
and same when I did my degree. Married with 2 children, we had to just cut every luxury.
Yeah.
We survived on 1 part-time wage. But my husband just said, if this is something you feel passionately that you need to do, then I'll support that. And, I don't know how we managed to live on 1 part-time wage with 2 kids and a mortgage, but we did it. But I think the difference was that I was doing it for me. And I remember my mum saying, I'm so glad that, you're doing it now because you want to do it. She said, I saw all of my sort of friends who were trying to put their kids through uni when you were younger, and they were working 2 and 3 jobs to try and support them, and they weren't quite sort of getting the most out of uni or making the best of it. So she said, I'm so glad you went because you wanted it. Yeah. So yeah, it was hard, but I did it.
I feel like a lot of teenagers at 18, 19 kind of go to university as like a lack of ideas almost. They kind of go and because they don't really know what job they want to do, so they don't really know what subject they want to study, and they just coast through the 3 years. But you had a clear, you knew you wanted to do some creative art, even from a young age, and so you just kind of like putting off the inevitable. I feel like from listening, it sounds like you knew what you were going to do it eventually. I feel but it was just a matter of when, and then when the opportunity came, you took it.
Yeah, definitely, and I've just not looked back. I'm still on that journey.
That's great, yeah. So I read on your page as well, your sculptural art that you make has sort of a history behind it. Could you please tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that links with my family ancestry. I think when I was small growing up, a working class family, and I never sort of quite felt that I quite fit. I felt like I was a bit of the jigsaw puzzle that weren't quite the right shape. There was nobody with red hair and freckles and blue eyes. I didn't look like my family. Nobody else was interested in the stuff I was interested in. And I just thought, well, am I really part of this family? How do I actually fit? But then the more I research my ancestors and I see the jobs that they did, lace makers, weavers, stockingers, framework knitters, chair bottomers, they're all doing these creative things with their hands, highly skilled individuals. And I think it was through that then I felt I am connected you know, I am connected to this family.
Yeah.
I may not look like them, but I am connected nonetheless. And then it gave me that sense of that I did belong. And I've kind of carried that on. So quite often when I'm asked to make a piece of sculpture, particularly for public spaces, you know, it would be very easy to just go away and make something and plonk it there and that's it. But it just wouldn't quite fit. So for me, it's about finding those connections and sort of delving a bit deeper, peeling back those layers, finding those history connections. And if there's the capacity to bring the community along with me on that journey, then I think that the finished piece that you place then into that landscape becomes more rooted, and people then take more ownership of it. It's not just your work, it's their work as well. So if I can find those connections, those links, those historic links or social links, cultural links, you know, it just makes the work more richer. So I think I try and work that in where possible.
Helps the art to be accepted more by the community and makes them feel like they have a connection with the art that comes in. Because often you get like these art pieces that are in areas and you always kind of feel like it doesn't quite fit the landscape, and it doesn't feel like just kind of feels like it's been thrown in almost to try and brighten up the area, but it doesn't. It's always so far better when you have something that incorporates the people and the landscape that it's in.
Yeah.
You also had a program, a project, Pilgrim Woman and Speak Her Name. Is there things you could tell us about that? Because that's quite a difference from the woven sculptures that you do. You know, these are like life-size and far more realistic than the conceptual art.
Yeah, it was. I can pinpoint the very moment of that change, because up to that point I'd been working on quite fluid shapes, quite organic, quite naturalistic, things that sort of really root themselves into the landscape. And at the same time I was doing more and more research into my sort of female ancestry and wanted to know more and getting frustrated at the lack of information. And then I was contacted by a lady called Dr. Anna Scott, and she was looking for an artist who would work with her on a project trying to bring history that was 400 years old, but from that place to school children and getting them to reimagine it and sort of delve into it. So I started working with her, and it was interesting that she was looking at some of these areas that I'd found some of my ancestors crisscrossing through. And that was the sudden change of then moving from that fluid organic shapes to more figurative work with a clear sort of route of looking at women's history as well. So it was working with Dr. Anna Scott, and that was the sort of very beginnings, that kernel of that idea for the Pilgrim Woman series. And she was looking at, we now know them as the Pilgrim Fathers, so the pilgrims that left these areas in 1620 on board the Mayflower. But what she was trying to bring forward was the stories that a lot of people don't know. The origin stories began in the Midlands, South Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, which most people don't realise. They all think they left from Plymouth, so they must be from Plymouth. They didn't just suddenly decide to get on the Mayflower. It was a longer story that began with religious persecutions and people wanting religious freedom, but then they were looking for tolerance and religious freedom, but then was not tolerant of others. And it was quite an interesting period of history that's very much mirrored today. We have a lot of people fleeing from persecution that are looking for religious freedom, looking for tolerance, and come up against people that are intolerant. So it's themes that are still prevalent today, but that caused a lot of change in that period of time within these areas. And it was this story that she was presenting to the children. It just got me fascinated, and that's what started the Pilgrim Woman series. And the first thing it was to kind of put myself in their shoes. So one of the first misconceptions was that the name Pilgrim Fathers, so you imagine older, wiser men, yet they weren't. They were young families, men, women, children, who were looking for a better life. And so straight away that's very different. But then also looking at the women, they were owned property of men at that time. So they were legally the property of the father, and then upon marriage, the property of the husband. They weren't allowed to have their own property. Anything they did have became their husband's upon marriage, apart from their paraphernalia, which is the bits that are deemed of no interest to a man. So she's allowed to have that bit, you know. She loses everything else she has, apart from these bits and pieces called paraphernalia. And it just made me start to question, well, did these women have a choice on these journeys that they were taking? You know, did anyone ask them if they wanted to go, you know, onto the other side of the world?
America,
yeah.
To the new land.
But then that choice to leave everything you know, to sever ties with your homeland, to sever your roots, go across the ocean to a new world, and leave some family behind. I just thought, well, how am I supposed to get that into an artwork? So I had the idea, which my family was not pleased with. I thought, well, they travelled on a ship called the Mayflower. It was a Tudor cargo ship designed for carrying casks of wine and spirits, not people. So it's a Tudor cargo ship, but we still have them. But they're not made of wood, they're made of metal, and they have big containers on them. So I thought, I'm going to cross the Atlantic on a freight ship, on a working ship, and I knew that if I did that, I would have no contact with the outside world. And I thought that would give me a first-hand experience of saying goodbye to my family, not knowing when and what time, or, you know, I would arrive, but not be able to talk to anybody. So I did that whilst reading William Bradford's diary, who crossed the Atlantic in 1620, and it gave me such an experience. But also, one of the big parts for me about unpicking that story is not just the people from here, but the impact it had on others. So it included not just people from Britain, but then their trip over to the Netherlands. So it was a period of doing research and access to academics in the Netherlands, accessing and speaking to people from the First Nations. I was interested in the Wampanoag, the Iroquois people that supported those early settlers when they arrived on the East Coast.
Taught them, tried to learn the language and stuff, didn't they? When people first went over, you had them trying to learn the language and show them how to cultivate the land, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the first Native Americans that they encountered actually spoke English.
Oh, right.
So he already knew broken English. But I wanted to be able to access those Indigenous arts as well. So I'd set this sort of period of travel on a freight ship, and then Harvard very kindly allowed me to go and research in their archives, so I could study up close artefacts of the Wampanoag. And then I got to do an artist residency at the Provincetown Pilgrim Monument and Museum, where I got to speak to hundreds of visitors and just really sort of soak in all of this information. And so it was a real turning point in, I think, my creative output, the way that I address projects. Is that period of research and development that then I've now applied the same method that I did with the Pilgrim Woman series to my new project, Speak Her Name.
How did you feel when you did go on that freight ship over to America, you know, saying goodbye to everyone? How did you actually, how did that make you feel? When you're trying to put yourself in their shoes?
It was really hard.
Was it?
It was harder than I thought it would be. But I just kept thinking, you know, be brave, put a brave face on. I'd signed this bit of paper to say that if I die at sea, that they would leave my remains at the first port. And it was sort of like, I am of good health, and so because they don't carry a doctor on board the ship. So there was that bit of trepidation, and I think I held it together for the whole voyage. But the thing that broke me was right at the end. They told me that I had to get out in Canada, not America, which was the original port, that I had to disembark in Canada. But when we did arrive in Canada, there was another very, very large ship, and it was delayed unloading its cargo. So we had to just sit, which meant then that I couldn't get off the ship, and I couldn't go to somewhere and find Wi-Fi, and I couldn't phone my family to say I've landed. And that's when it kind of hit home what I'd done. And I just found a quiet corner of the ship and I just cried.
Really?
I think I just sat there for about an hour, just cried. I think it was all that sort of
Pent
stress.
up emotions,
Yeah.
I think, maybe that you had on the whole journey.
Yeah.
Just let it all out.
Yeah.
How long did it take then in the end?
So I was away for 4 weeks in total.
Yeah.
10 of those was spent crossing the Atlantic.
Wow.
And then some time in Canada. Then I made my way down to Boston for Harvard for 2 days there, and then crossed another body of water, Cape Cod Bay, and a 2-week residency in Provincetown. So that took 4 weeks in total. But it was an incredible period of time to do all of that research.
You also have a YouTube channel that I had a little quick look at. Why did you feel like it was necessary to make a YouTube channel? Did you want to try and spread awareness for your latest research on your latest project, or why?
I think it's a very good question actually. There's a couple of different reasons. I think when I was going through university, and we had to do these professional practice modules. So you had to sort of find somebody who was doing something you aspire to do or to be like, and to look at their journey. And that was really hard, to try and find first a female sculptor, or a female sculptor with children that had succeeded. The one that was creating things for landscape. It felt quite niche, and I couldn't find very much. So, and I constantly go to, I'm going to Nottingham College where I trained, did my first A-level next week to do another professional practice module. So I love being able to sort of go back and talk to students who may be at that beginning of that journey and sort of share my path. But I think, it's making it accessible, and, if that helps to inspire somebody to just, no matter what's going off in their life, just to follow something that's sort of burning in them to do. It is hard, but you've got to go and fight for something if you want it. So there's that side, is that trying to inspire others. But then the other side is the actual creation. I think a lot of people, when they see artwork or public artwork, they maybe don't know or are not aware the vast amount of work that goes into that sometimes they think, you just have an idea, you make it and you put it. Yeah. My current project, I've been working on it for 4 years, and it's still not finished. And there's such a huge amount of preparation that goes into it, and it's being able to share that. And I think the third one is for people to have a go. And I know other artists who say to me, you're giving away all your techniques, you're making them free, is that not going to devalue your work? And I was like, well, no, because they're not me. There's only me that can make my sculpture that with my hands in my way. But, why not let somebody else have a go?
Art is supposed to be shared. It's something that's meant to be, you want other people to be creative, and you want to learn off other people and then incorporate your own things, but everyone wants their own individuality with art. You don't just want to, it can't always be the same, so no one's ever going to copy your work completely. You're just sharing your ideas and how you got there.
Yeah, like, and I just love it when I get messages. I get them from all over the world, people who say, oh, thank you for sharing, this is fantastic. And then some people I've even had Zooms with them because they've wanted to know more, and we've had like a little one-to-one session. So it's just really nice to be able to connect with other creatives, and just thinking back to how I started, and, if that was available then, I kind of think, well, would that have made a big difference to my journey and my path if I could have accessed, that information. So hopefully that's answered your question.
Yeah, it did, yeah. Links in a little bit with the next question as well of you sell kits that you can also have, you also make a video of like a tutorial on how to make them and stuff like that. I just want to know, like, is that part of you want to inspire other people to create their own art and stuff like that, try and get them involved? And
it kind of came not by accident, but it was kind of forced. So I was in the middle of one of my Pilgrim Women projects. So I was working on Pilgrim Woman Boston at the time, and then we all went into national lockdown. So everybody was forced then to stop, but I had a project to deliver with a timeline to stick to, and that couldn't stop. And part of that commission was to engage people. So I just started thinking, well, how can I engage with somebody who's living in Boston? I can't go to see them. They're not allowed to come to me. We've all got to stay put. And I thought, well, I've got everything I need in my studio. I've got a phone with a camera on it. So I designed a kit that would go through a letterbox. So whatever it went in there, everything had to fit in this little box. And so I designed this kit, and then I made a tutorial for that project, and it meant that we didn't miss deadlines. So I was able to send 120 kits to women living across Boston, and then they had all of these instructions, my video, and then they had a prepaid envelope and a special piece of cotton that had been pre-impregnated with wax. So the idea was that they were going to add some of their work to the sculpture, but it needed to be coated with wax so it would burn properly in the lost wax technique that I use. So what was amazing was that sort of 4 or 5 weeks later, all of these envelopes were coming through the door, and I was opening them and getting these little samples of weaving from these women across Boston, often with little notes. Some English weren't their first language, so they'd got somebody else to write it for them. And I was getting all of these little messages and artwork through the post, which was just amazing. And so I was able to continue the project, but work remotely. And it just, when I came to evaluate that project, I just thought, well, now we're out of lockdown, but some people, they can't access these art classes, or they might be at work, or they might be isolating for other reasons. So I've just continued it now within my project, that there's a part of the project that is always remote participation as well as in person. And some of the tools I use, like the Lucet, they're not widely available. They're handmade by a carpenter. It's a tool that was introduced when we lived under Dane rule, so that's about 1,000 years ago. It's not a popular weaving technique, so things like that is not readily available. So I put them together and make them available on my website, so people can have a go at some of the tools I use.
I think it's very important as well. I think it's good for people who might struggle with mental health, anxiety or depression, that they can still participate, but from where they feel comfortable, which is still at home. I think that would be very, that's part of why we at Skilled Hands do what we do. We have artisanal craft workshops that we do, and these podcasts are to try and get people to come and inspire them, and people like you on the podcast to inspire others to come and out their shell and come join artisanal crafts. We also sell our stuff online to help women with an extra bit of income. I don't know if your crafts or anything like that can be, just sold. So when you send them away and people make them, are they then sent back to you, or? Yeah.
Well, it depends on what kit it is, whether it's a kit that's part of a project, and so like the one for Pilgrim Woman, and for Standing in This Place, my current project, I knew that I wanted to include an intricate texture, but you needed lots of pieces of that braid or woven piece to make that texture. And so with Standing in This Place, we actually sent out 200 kits, across the Midlands, and they also had prepaid envelopes so that they could send back a sample. But they got to keep everything else in the kit, you know, the weaving materials, the actual tool that they'd need. So they get something, a reward at the, you know, for a thank you for being part of the project and for sending back a piece of their work. They also got to keep something. But then I also make the kits for people who aren't part of the projects. You know, it might be that somebody's seeing a technique that I use but can't get that material, can't get that tool, so that I make them available on my website.
Do you ever have any art, probably more your woven sculptures that you make, that you feel are too good to sell or get rid of? Or do you think, you know, sometimes this is my best work, I'm proud of it and I want to sell it? Do you ever feel like that?
Gosh, it's really hard because you put so much of yourself in everything, you know, and it's that bittersweet because at the end of the day, I need to earn a living. I need to sell my sculptures to bring in an income, but then sometimes you make a piece that's just, you've just poured so much of yourself into
so
it.
Much more meaningful to you.
Yeah, and a collection I made sort of springs to mind, and I was accepted for this touring show called Made in the Middle. So it was to highlight makers from the Midlands, because the organisation felt that too much focus was given on London-centric artists and that they should focus on another area. So it was called Made in the Middle for makers across the East and West Midlands. And I was accepted, and as part of that you made something new, a new collection, and it went off on a tour. And I set myself this challenge to try and add very, very tiny, intricate macrame knots into the lost wax technique to see if it would work. So the foundry agreed to sort of go on this challenge with me, and so I had a period of research and development. Not all of it worked, some of it was disastrous, but then some of it did work. And I made this set of 5 pieces that went on this tour, and at the end of the tour not a single piece sold. And I thought, well, that's fine because I really like these, but it had cost me a lot of money to make them. And then this lady got in touch. She said, I just really like your work. Could you, you know, I'd like some pieces for the garden. And it was while we were talking about her garden, I'd been to see her. She took me around the garden, you know, and when you make a garden, it's so personal because you've put a lot of yourself in, just like with art. So I think it's being there with the client to sort of get that experience and feel that landscape is really important when you're going to make something. And afterwards we sat in the kitchen and she said, I've been looking at these other pieces that you've been doing on that touring show. I said, oh yes, the knotted collection. She said, I really like them. Could you bring them with you the next time you come with the large sculptures? So I took them along, all 5, and she said, I'm going to have all of them. And I was like, what? I wasn't prepared. But she also said, I want a copy of your artist's CV and your personal statement as well, because she said, it's something I want to pass down, you know, and I think having that story of why you've made them, how you've made them, but information about you should also go with them. So it was kind of that bittersweet moment, you know, that she'd taken all of them, these pieces that I'd poured so much of myself into, but then at the same time it was good. This I'd sold them. Yeah, you know, but it was how she reacted to hearing about them and the journey I'd gone on, and that she wanted to capture a bit of that with the items, the paperwork that went with it.
So last question that I have for you really is, how rewarding does it feel when you get that appreciation of other people for the work you've done? You know, you spent 4 years on this latest project. You spent so long, so much time, so much effort. How rewarding does it feel when it really pays off?
Gosh, I don't know. I've put myself under a lot of pressure, and it sometimes takes a while to kind of look back and go, oh, I achieved that. Because I think, you know, like my current project, it's a very complex history. It's a very complex narrative. I have sort of bad dreams about it all the time, about people coming up to me and not liking what I've done. I had a dream the other day about the foundry put the wrong heads on the sculpture, and I was just in a panic mode. And then I had another dream where somebody said, "Oh, have you just made that sculpture?" And I said, "Yes." And then they stabbed me and I woke up and I was just like, like this,
Cold sweats.
yeah. So often when you're in the midst of a project, you don't actually get that feeling at all. I think it's when you stop years later and you look back,
reflect on it.
Yeah, and I think I'm starting to do that now with my Pilgrim Woman series. That that's finished. There's 3 sculptures now in their landscapes in the different places. I'm still being asked to give talks and do exhibitions on it, but the sculptures feel like they're embedded now into that landscape. And now I look back on it and think, gosh, I did that, look what I did to achieve that. We installed that one, and I was post-COVID sort of sat in a wheelie chair being wheeled around a museum whilst watching my sort of 6'5" sculpture coming off the back of a lorry in the middle of a gale. And then the next sculpture, I was ill again with COVID, and I had to literally be a face on a screen at the time when the lorry's there installing the sculpture. So someone stood there with a screen with my head on it, and I'm going left a bit, right a bit. And then the third sculpture gets a bit like the history, incarcerated in a basement for a year whilst we wait for historic planning permission. So in the very time that those pilgrims got put in jail. So it's sort of like, that's finished now, the dust is settling. Now I can look back and go, oh, I think I did all right there. Yeah, I think I've done a good job. But it's getting to that point is hard, and there's always that sort of imposter syndrome, but you sometimes do have to stop and take a look back and go, okay, yeah, I've done that, right, what's next? What's the next challenge?
Right, well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It's been great actually talking to you. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching. We have 6 other episodes. If you could please check them out on our Skilled Hand Sounds channel, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.